China 2010 with a very distinguished group of speakers. We have with us Linda Chen, partner KPMG, Jake Xu, CEO of the Symbio Group, Harry Shum, Corporate Vice President, Search Development at Microsoft, and Lip Bhutan, Chairman, Walden International, and President and CEO of Cadence, and our moderator, Robin Chan, CEO of XPD Media. Thank you all for joining us to speak this evening. Our lead sponsor for this program is the Symbio Group, and we certainly appreciate their support. Thank you very much, Symbio. KPMG is our supporting sponsor, and we thank them as well. And we would also, of course, like to thank Microsoft for opening their facility to us this evening. A quick mention about upcoming programs. Next on our stage on Tuesday, August 4, we present Anish Chopra, the Chief Technology Officer of the United States. This will be held at the Computer History Museum, and it is Chopra's first Bay Area appearance since being appointed in this role last April. Next on August 20, Chris Carmichael, who is the personal coach to Lance Armstrong, is going to come and talk about performance and leadership. And then finally, on September 21st, Oracle CEO Larry Ellison will take the Churchill stage with Ed Zander and talk about industry, tech, the world, and more. So we hope that you will join us. You can RSVP, of course, on our website, and always check to see what programs we have on tap, because we're always working on new and interesting things for you. For those of you who are less familiar with the club, it is the premier business and technology forum in the Bay Area. We have 6,000 members and 23 years of dynamic, newsworthy programs. We are a not-for-profit, member-supported organization, and if you are not a member and you enjoy tonight's program, we do encourage you to consider membership. You can find out more again at churchillclub.org, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. And if you do plan to tweet from tonight's program, please use the hashtag Churchill Club, #Churchill Club. Now it is a great privilege to introduce our moderator, Robin Chan. Robin is the founder and CEO of XPD Media, a venture-backed social gaming company based in Beijing and Silicon Valley. Robin previously held executive positions at Verizon and Time Warner. He was born and raised in Hawaii and went to the same high school as Barack Obama. It turns out Steve Case and Pierre Omidyar. I think there was a little bit of a gap there.
Pressure.
Yes, in years. But he told me that he was forced to attend Chinese language school at a young age just in case, according to his parents. And Robin double-hedged. He one-upped them by studying Japanese and Chinese throughout high school and college in case the parents were wrong. So everyone, please help me welcome Robin Chan.
Thanks for joining us, folks. Today we have a distinguished panel. I'd like to kind of give them hats. We have the entrepreneur, we have the multinational, Linda the deal maker, and we have, of course, Lip-Bu the sage. So just start off with a couple of factoids. While we're in tough times globally in the economy, China, Merrill Bank of America announced that they revised up the economic forecast for China from 8% this year to 8.7%. Last quarter, China went up to 7.9% GDP growth. Three kind of takeaways on some factors you may not know. There is a company that is the largest social network that's not named Facebook, and it's making a ton of money, and it's public, and it just recently has a larger market capitalization than Yahoo, and it's called Tencent. There is while the U.S. government is working to support the automotive industry in the U.S., the Chinese market is now the #1 auto market in the world. GM China is very profitable, and the last quarter, I believe, grew 37%. And of course, the most influential and powerful mobile company in the world is not Apple, but China Mobile, with well over 400 million subscribers. So looking at these statistics are very seductive, and that's why investors, multinationals, and entrepreneurs all want to learn about this market. We're going to divide the panel in two parts. First part is about dispelling a lot of conventional thoughts about what China is about. And so there's 5 myths that I will present and ask these stage panelists what their thoughts are. The second half is going to be a lot lessons, hard-earned lessons from the trenches, from the field, about what they learned in working and operating in China. So the first myth is China is a place for copycats. There's no innovation. And I'll ask the sage, thoughts?
Well, I think I won't agree with that. I think there's a lot of innovation in China. I think you mentioned quite a few. And I personally involved with some of them, like Sina, I start from that beginning, the portal, and then they migrate into the platform and with multiple vertical. And so I think it's a huge market, and there's a lot of talent. Same thing, you look at Huawei, and they have become the number 2 in a very strong company, 23 billion next year. And then you look at the semiconductor that I'm heavily involved. We're involved with SMIC, the largest wafer fab. We have 2,000 patents and filed. And so I think just the list is just on and on. And I think they already start, they look at the university, they have Tsinghua and Beida, and then they're very talented. They're starting to break through some new ground. And you look at the energy level, energy, solar energy related area, tremendous research going on. And so I think they are moved to the next level now.
Harry, you helped launch Microsoft Research in Beijing. Innovation?
Before I say something very positive about innovation in China, let me just say, first of all, I think there's nothing wrong to copy. And if we look at the history, even in the United States, and not too long ago, United States was accused of just copying everything from the United Kingdom. So you have to start somewhere. In science and the research in particular, we learn, because a lot of great people already done great stuff before us. So my personal experience is that I worked in Microsoft Research Asia for 9 years. Until 2 years ago, I was working in Beijing. Over the years, the research lab there has grown to a fairly sizable organization with about 200 researchers, about 300 interns. From computer science research point of view, Microsoft Research has really become one of the most well-known entities in computer science research. Clearly, that shows that with proper training and the right environment, innovations can happen in China. I have no question about that. Lipo just mentioned about the tremendous talent pool there in China, particularly with the, I would say, fairly healthy education system in China. I think there's no shortage of supply of talent. The question there for China is really, can we really take the raw talent and educate them enough to really become the world-leading researchers and engineers and the scientists? I personally feel very positive about the future of China in the area of innovation. I have personally witnessed, in some sense, contribute slightly to the advancement of Chinese science and technology. So I'm very positive.
Harry, has Microsoft applied any of the innovations within Microsoft Research China for global impact?
If you look at the main product lines Microsoft has, from Windows to Office to Bing and to Xbox and all those things, anywhere you look at that, then you see tremendous technologies we actually have created with our engineers and the researchers by our Chinese colleagues in China, in Beijing, Shanghai, Shenzhen, and other places. If I may take an example, for instance, if you use Bing.com, first of all, I think everyone should use Bing.com, and I should tell me that anything that we are not doing as good as our competitors. And particularly, I'm very proud that we have a very good image search engine. It's actually a research area I worked for many, many years. And one very interesting feature is that we're just talking about at the dinner time. If you search today, for images, mostly you type, say, cats and text, then you get a bunch of pictures. But now actually you can also use the content of the image to search if you use Bing. Only if you use Bing. And I'll give you an example. You should try tonight. You go to bing.com to try image search and type Van Gogh. Van Gogh, then you get all those beautiful pictures and the paintings from Van Gogh. Then you look at that and say, wow, this is actually this sunflower picture. You choose that picture, and you see a link there, say, show similar images. And you just click that, boom, you get all those similar sunflower beautiful paintings. The technology was actually initially developed there in China by our colleagues there. So this is just a small example. We have seen a lot of other things from Windows to Office to Xbox.
Jake.
Yeah, well, I'm glad that Harry's here, because then I don't have to talk about what Microsoft's doing in China. I think Microsoft is doing a lot of very innovative things in China. And I think Microsoft was actually one of the early pioneers in R&D in China. I think here in the West, and I'm originally from Silicon Valley. I moved to China about 5 years ago. We get very enamored with business model innovations. So if you actually look at a lot of innovation here, a lot of people are actually referring to business model innovations. I think very early on, China was already doing a lot of technological innovation, especially a lot of areas like Harry was speaking about. I think today, though, a few years ago, there was probably quite a bit of copy to China. Actually, that was sort of C2C. That was sort of one of the jokes back in the e-commerce days. But that's changed a lot, because now Chinese companies don't need to copy anymore. I think the reason being is a few years ago, Chinese companies, the Chinese domestic market really wasn't quite as developed as it is today. But if you look at most Chinese companies today, especially the startups, they're building products for China first. That's their core market. And you're seeing that the successful companies are finding that when you copy a model from the US and you try to replicate it in China, and I think a lot of Western companies can probably share experience with this, it doesn't really work quite well for China. So you're seeing a lot of homegrown innovation now that's coming out of China. I think Tencent is a great example. Tencent started off as a company that was basically copying ICQ. And today, I think that you would be very hard-pressed to say that Tencent isn't probably one of the most innovative companies in China in terms of developing new features, new types of innovations for their core audience. And I think, I'll bring up one other example, which is the Shenzai market. People, I don't know if people know about this market here. It basically started off as basically knockoff phones in China, and initially it was to knock off Nokia phones and feature phones. And then a couple of years ago, something called the iPhone came out into the market, and suddenly all these cottage industry sort of Shenzai, suppliers started making pretty good iPhone knockoffs, and including hacking the software, creating pretty good imitations of iPhones. Well, what's emerged from that, I think, is that first, you're starting to see that the Shenzai market has become a bona fide, actual, real, legitimate market. So you have companies like Kphone that emerged initially as a copycat company, but now is sort of shipping millions of phones every month as a legitimate phone supplier. But you're also seeing at the same time the rise of these ultra-efficient hardware supply chains that arose because of these Shenzai markets. And because of that today, you're starting to see a lot of very cool companies, especially startup companies, that are actually building a lot of what I would consider sort of next generation connected devices. I think some of the most exciting stuff that's going to come out of China in the next few years is going to be in the area of devices between the laptop and the phone, these converged devices. And I think a lot of those things are going to come out of China because of the Shenzai market and the fact that anybody can go and create their own hardware device, their own phone, their own software, and do it in units as low as a couple hundred units to do that. And I think those types of innovations are going to start to percolate their way onto the world market.
Next myth and first question is going to be directed to Linda. China as a place for cheap labor as the primary reason to enter China.
Primary reason. I would say probably a myth more than anything else. I think you could definitely find cheap labor somewhere else in ASPEC region. China is probably not the cheapest anymore with obviously inflation, payroll increases, and things like that. But I think what is repeated by the other panelists, I think the workforce there is highly educated. Very eager to work. I could speak from my own personal experience of building a team in Shanghai when I was there 2 years ago. Very bright people, fairly young, well-educated, well-informed, What is probably lacking is probably the experience, and then I think that's just natural for a fairly young country, let's put it, in terms of commerce development. So certainly not cheap labor, that's for sure.
They have efficiencies, right, because of the
Yes.
supply chain and the
Yes.
ecosystem.
Yes.
And that
Yes.
creates certain opportunities.
Definitely, definitely.
Jake, any thoughts on this?
Yeah. Well, as a company that's in the software outsourcing business, this is a topic near and dear to my heart. So I think there's sort of a dark side and a positive side to this. I think, first, it is a myth. I think the dark side is that, frankly, the costs in China are rising pretty quickly, especially in cities like Beijing and Shanghai. I would say that, certainly from our perspective, if you work with Symbio today, chances are most of your development teams most of your development will be done in places like Chengdu and Hangzhou and some of the other cities in China, probably not in Beijing or Shanghai, just because of costs. I think, first of all, costs are rising in China. But I think that's also just that's sort of missing the point. I think, as we were talking about innovation, and I think as Linda just mentioned, if you're only going to China because of labor cost arbitrage, then you're kind of missing the point of China. Today, China, I think, is going to emerge as really a center of innovation, a center of creativity and new ideas. And companies and people who are still kind of set on that mindset of, I'm going to China because it's cheap labor or it's cheap manufacturing, I think are going to be in for kind of a rude awakening, because I think the country is changing so quickly.
Lipu, would you invest in an entrepreneur that says, we're going to do this idea in China, but because we've got leaner labor costs, we're going to win? Is that a compelling pitch?
No, it's not compelling. And I think, the cost is no more the cheapest. I mean, you can go to Vietnam or Cambodia much cheaper, or Philippines. And I think the cost, if you add on the real estate costs, all the transportation, and also the law in China right now is not easy to lay off people. And there's a lot of additional costs. If you add up to it, it's not that cheap. And the attrition is pretty high if it's like Shanghai or Shenzhen or Beijing. So I think if you add up those loaded costs, it's not that cheap anymore. So I think if you invest in just purely for cost arbitrage, I think you're going to be disappointed.
Okay. And Harry, you opened a whole facility close to Shanghai. The objective is strategic, financial, in terms of developing that labor pool.
Well, I would say you should look at the talent at the different levels. And you probably want to look at the labor market from fairly junior all the way to fairly senior. At the relatively senior level, and I would say the talent is really truly international. Those people can choose to work in Beijing or Shanghai, or they can come to Silicon Valley. To retain those people, in Shanghai or in Beijing, you have to pay let me just say, international price. But I would also say, as every panelist said, China does have this very healthy labor supply, workforce supply. I think at the fairly junior level, we still can see the cost effectiveness there.
Right.
But that's really I think it's also changing, and as Jack said, rising very, very quickly. I personally have seen, 10 years ago, the price, average entry-level developer programmer, and compare with today, and the relative price compared with Silicon Valley, I think it's clearly rising. But I think it's really depending on how you look at what kind of talent you would like to have, and you have to really think about that. Even to manage a junior team, you still need some mid-level manager and even senior managers.
It's a tricky myth. So I'm a U.S. company, and I see the growth of China. I need to get into China. It has to be part of my growth strategy. Myth? Lipu.
Well, I think the China market is just so huge that you cannot ignore. And so I think the first thing you should look at is the China market. How big is that? How are you going to address it? And I always believe that almost like you're a pilot, you're flying in, make sure that you have a safe landing, emergency landing. So don't go in blindly, and most likely going to be in trouble. And so you need to know who to call, how to get in case of emergency.
What does blindly mean in your definition?
You have to protect your downside, and it's it's not an easy place to do business and make money. And also I think, the complexity, is, if you involve some standard or government policy, and it can be very tricky. And so, the regulation can change overnight and right in front of you, and the whole game plan change. You have to go to your plan B, how you're going to adopt and change and make money and survive. So I think that is very important to know. And then the other thing is also you have to really realize that middle management is completely non-existent. So you have to really train. It takes some time, 3 to 5 years, to really build that middle management. And a lot of people underestimate that requirement.
So, so to summarize, if you're go eyes wide open and go long, because it is not something that can instantaneously inject growth in your strategies.
That's right. And also have to think long term. Don't just go in there, you're thinking about doing a quick return. It won't happen. So you just have to prepare to be there for long term.
Harry, you were there for 9 years.
I completely agree. I completely agree with what Lipu said. And when we think about China, we really have to, really think for the next 10 to 20 years. And I still remember, not too long ago, we invited Professor Larry Lau of Chinese University of Hong Kong. He was a professor of economics of Stanford before he became the president in Hong Kong. We invited him to give a talk in Redmond campus in Microsoft, and his talk title was Chinese Economy, the Past, the Present, and the Future. So he just very rationally predicted that in 25 years, Chinese economy, the total GDP is going to be equal to that of the United States. Assuming that is going to be the case, for every multinational or for any company with aspiration, you have to really think about invest for the future. So I completely agree with what Lipu said, that we have to take China very seriously, and we better invest early, and we have to take a long-term approach. Another point that Lipu made, that the mid-level management is a huge challenge for all the companies, like Microsoft. We get there and we train the local workforce, train local people, and hopefully in 5 years that many of them can step out and really take the significant responsibilities there. I think the bottom line is that we have to take China very seriously if we think about the future growth.
So Linda, if there's no you have to groom your middle management, and rules change all the time. How do you value a company? What do you tell your clients about these issues?
Well, it certainly makes my job a lot more interesting and a lot more challenging. You can't really refer to the past as what is going to be the future, because they may be growing 50%, 100%, or even 200% every single year. And do you see that to be happening in the future for the next 10 years? Maybe, maybe not. So we take a very systematic approach. Not only do we look at it from top to bottom, but we also look at it from a company perspective. So it's really putting a lot of moving pieces together. And certainly, like I said, it really takes, I would say that providing advisory services, which is really what I do, in China, I feel a lot more accomplished. I certainly hope and like to think that it's more value added for my clients, because you are dealing with a lot of issues. There's, as most of the panelists have mentioned, constant changes in regulations, constant changes in tax structures, and that's very big for foreign companies coming in, because certain tax benefits that you have enjoyed 2 years ago may go away all of a sudden, and that would change your game plan in terms of tax planning. In terms of regulation, Chinese government is very present in every aspect of the commerce, of the life of the people there, and it's very important to be, in order to be successful in China, to understand what the government is thinking, because most likely that's how the regulation is going to change from that perspective. So if I would advise anybody who is thinking of doing business in China or want to be successful in doing business in China, not only doing your due diligence, having backup plan, but really you need to take the pulse of the Chinese government so that you are not blindsided if they changes the laws tomorrow.
Jake?
Well, I think if you're a company that your exit horizon is 2 years, 3 years, I'd say don't go to China, because to be there, you've got to have a commitment, and you've got to be in it for the long run, because the reality is that, I mean, today, if you want to be in China, you've got to bring your A game. I think here in the West, I think certainly for a lot of American companies, I think we've traditionally been, we sort of think of the world as the U.S. and then they're sort of international, right? Or in a lot of cases, people sort of think, well, then it's like Asia Pac. So the Asia Pac guys will take care of China. But it's a very different. Today China is a very different place, and if you want to be successful there, first the cost of entry has gone up quite a bit. So today it's no longer you can send sort of send a couple of your team members over there and set up an office. I mean here there's a lot of competition. The market is hyper competitive. The market certainly is growing very quickly, but that's leading to a lot of competition. Certainly, as our panelists have said, I mean, lots of changes in regulations. I think in general, you have to get used to uncertainty if you want to be in China, and that's why having that commitment, having that vision of where you want to be, let's say 5, 10 years, and that kind of success, that's what's going to guide you through these the times of uncertainty. Myself, I've been going to China for about 11 years now, and I have to say that. There's not one year where I entered the year and I came out the other side sort of doing what I thought I was going to do that year, and our strategies constantly change. So, having this, there's this fallacy about having these long-term 5-year plans or 3-year plans. You have to be able to, you have to sort of have a vision, stick with that vision, and, be flexible. You have to be able to adapt quickly in the market.
So far, what I'm hearing is it's a huge market, really messy. You have to go long. You have to bring your A game. Myth number 4, China's going to take over the world. Lip-boo? You have a great prism of context for being so early. Is this trajectory going to keep going? They will match or exceed the U.S. and GDP. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think Harry mentioned about Professor Lawrence Lau, and then if you ask him, he's very bullish. I mean, he looked at clearly very ambitious and very bullish about the China, and I tend to agree with him. And if you look at the stimulus plan that they put together, and it's so effective, and then if they decided to build a hospital, it's not a debate. It's just how many months it will be finished. And so now you look at the Olympics, I think it's clearly that right in front of your eyes. And then poor United Kingdom going to be hard to match that because how quickly they build the whole infrastructure, and it's really a showcase. I mean, they learn from Korea, using as a stage to kind of launching the superpower status. And clearly, I think right now, trillions of dollars of US, we're borrowing from them. So I think overall, I think it's a very forward-looking, and then if you look at some of the minister title, they're very proud to be an engineer. And then that is really, very passionate about the engineering background. And I look around in our university, some of you are involved, it's just kind of concerned about the engineering interest. And I try to educate my 2 boys. I was just so happy that, one of the boy decided to drop after the high school instead of go to college, CMU like Harry, and took 1 year off to Beijing. I said, well, that may be the smartest decision that you ever make. And now he can speak, read, and then communicate in Mandarin, and then text message, short messages, playing online game. And I said, boy, you're on the right track. And,
Back to the future. Linda?
So getting back to your original,
So what do you tell your clients? You know, you have to be in China, or else it is going to be a huge mistake, or
well, I think certainly if you look at the population, you look at the growth that the country has gone through, they have proven track record of doing what they said they were going to do. I think a lot of the countries, a lot of the economists, if you talk to them in beginning of this year, they would have said that the China would not be able to achieve its high single-digit growth. But as we have seen now, they have achieved 7.9%, I believe, GDP growth for the first half of the year, and they're projecting to reach more than 8%. For third quarter. So it's very impressive in light of all the other countries that are either shrinking or whatever else. So I think probably you're not going to see China taking over the world in 5 years, but 10 years.
do you
15,
foresee KPMG?
taking over the world? Probably not.
Do you see for KPMG having KPMG China having a very, very leadership presence in, among the kind of the global offices because of the growth?
That is certainly the plan and the expectation. Right now, we have 12 offices across the country. We have 75,000 employees in just China alone, and that number is growing leaps and bounds. Just because we are making a lot of investments in our resource. I mean, we're a service firm. Our main asset is really our workforce. So yes, we are anticipating that KPMG China will be a significant force within the international member firm of KPMG.
So Harry, so the number one internet market, the number one mobile market, number one online game market. I'm just thinking of Xbox, I'm thinking about Windows, I'm thinking about Bing. What's the play for China? Is it more important than the U.S.?
I actually want to provide a little bit maybe historical perspective. You know, I just realized that Lipo, I assume you were not born in China, and okay, so looks like I was the only one here who actually born in China. First of all, I would say that China is the force to be recognized, and Olympics really it was very clear statement that China is becoming a superpower. I actually left China in 1987, and when I left China, there was no highway. Even in 1987, there was no highway, and in 1984, the first time there was something called a supermarket in China, the first ever supermarket in Beijing. I actually went to that place. I was hugely surprised that you can buy something without asking the sales girl. You can just go take something. That's what a concept. And 21 years later, and I went back to attend the opening ceremony of Olympics. I must say, when the national anthem went up, I was pretty much, practically in tears. And it was very difficult for me to imagine that 21 years ago, when I left China, China would be like this. But having said that, even so, I believe, the prediction that 20, 25 years later, Chinese GDP might be able to match with the U.S. GDP. I would say China's growth comes with some significant cost. If you look at the industries that China has been good at, the manufacturing, a lot of things, that comes with all the industry actually is very heavily energy kind of consuming. You look at the IT industry, China is still significantly behind the United States and other countries. I think it still will be a long way, for China to grow. And even by the time China, the GDP is, going to match the United States, I think let's not forget that the average GDP of China will be still significantly behind that of the United States.
Per capita, you mean?
Per capita, yeah, per capita. So I'm cautiously optimistic about China's future, and partly because I was working in research, and I was very involved in helping the Chinese universities. One thing I think gave me a lot of help and the confidence about the Chinese future is really the education. and the education system that the government has put there. Perhaps more importantly, the Chinese culture, where we emphasize so much, on the education side. I think that alone gives me a lot of hope. And
Jake?
Yeah, I guess the myth is China's going to take over the world. Is it?
Well, you have an interesting company over time. Starting, the roots were from Silicon Valley, and now the bulk of your employees, and you're ramping quite well out of China in various cities.
Yeah. Well, I guess I think everything that the panelists have said before, I absolutely agree with. I think it's I would certainly not bet against China becoming the largest country by GDP, by 2020, as most estimates have. I mean, what's more astounding to me is just from a scale perspective, just, China, the one estimate says that by 2015, China will have more English speakers than the United States, right? So
they speak Chinglish.
Yeah, it's Chinglish. But I think that, you can sort of see just the scale alone will get it there. I think just bulk, brute force scale will get it there. But I think, to address the other point about that is just, I think the quality is increasing very quickly. And one of the things I've been very heartened by is I've tracked, my business being, R&D, co-creation services for technology companies, I'm always asked about IP, right? I'm always asked about IP protection. I always asked about innovation in China. And, so I track that very closely. And to give you an idea, this year, the number of patents filed in China is now the biggest in the world. So there are 800,000 patents that were filed in China alone in 2009. Even the number of patents in the US, so Chinese companies getting patents in the US has increased from about 90 patents, I think, I can't remember when it was, a couple of years ago, to last year there was 1,250 patents awarded to Chinese companies in the United States. So you can sort of see that the innovation by that metric is really starting to ramp up quite a bit. And I know Chinese government is also investing, I think their target is spending 2.5% of GDP on R&D and innovation. So I think you're really starting to see that the Chinese government is really focused on how to create more knowledge industries in China. And what does that ultimately mean? It goes back to sort of some of the earlier things that we said of, China is going to be a place of innovation and creativity coming about. And I think that is sort of what I'm more bullish about. I think, the economic figures will get it there, but I think it's really sort of what are they doing to get to those GDP numbers. I think one other point about your question, the reason I asked about the question was, I've always found that, especially the media here in the West likes to sort of portray China as this empire that is trying to take over the world. I think if you speak to any Chinese government official, you speak to anybody, they have no interest in taking over the world. I think if you talk to most of them, I find that most government officials in China are probably very, very humble. And they're very focused on how, when you talk to them, they're going to tell you about what areas they still need to catch up. And most government officials say, we have a lot of work to do. And they do. So I think, there isn't this sort of hegemony, there isn't this sort of manifest destiny that's happening with the Chinese government. I think they really just want to take care of what's going on in their own borders.
But there must be black swans. There must be scenarios that could happen. It could be environmental, it could be demographic. Anything out there that could really disturb that growth. Lip-Bu, any thoughts on anything that possibly changes all assumptions?
Well, I think clearly the growth is not going to be all straight line. There's going to be some bumpy road along. And clearly, I think in the government eye, there's a couple of things is very, they watch very carefully. And I think, the disparity between the big city and the smaller city and is quite a big, the gap is getting wider. And so I think government very worried about the unrest situations. And then secondly, try to maintain, they're really smart, they learn from Russia and then they figure out, how to grow the economy, capital system, but meanwhile still protect the communist system, the belief. And that's not easy to do. I have a lot of respect for them, how to strike that balance. And then so sometimes they can be a little bit seen as overreacting. Like Fulonggang, I was involved with MIT, the website got shut down, tried to figure out why, and end up because some user using that as a gathering for Fulonggang, and the whole website got shut down. Same thing with recently, I mean, the Twitter equivalent in China got shut down across the board because, they are very worried about, some gathering together or student movement. And so that can really, destroy the whole communist system and then right in the root of it. So anything to do that can violate that communist or anti-communist, don't get that. I mean, you're going to be in deep trouble. And so that is very sensitive for them. And in terms of, there's always some natural disaster like earthquake or something can hold them back. And then the other thing is the inflations. And so there's a lot of things in their mind they're worried about. And then meanwhile, they, as Jacob correctly pointed out, they're very humble, and they are really, very far-sight thinking. And sometimes you sit down with them and then sit down in Washington, you kind of wondering which country am I in? And it's such an opposite in terms of the priority that they're concerned about, and it just amazed me.
Myth number 5, Linda. China needs foreign direct investment. It needs capital from the Western markets to grow.
I think it would be more of a myth than truth, because the country is full of capital. I don't think it needs more capital. This is not the China of 5 years ago or 10 years ago. What it actually needs is knowledge. It needs know-how. It needs experience. It needs technology. So you'll see that reflected in the regulation in the tax law. They are promoting certain industries, certain investments, and that's all pointing to importing this knowledge-based assets into the company, into the country. It's not capital. It's not money.
Harry?
I agree everything Linda said.
That was quick.
I want some disagreements here.
I would say China needs to get capital out of the country. I think it's, there's too much, because I think there's so much. There has been capital controls in China in terms of money going out, so you find that asset values rise very quickly because it floats between the stock market and real estate, and it just keeps going back and forth. So I think China needs to find a way of getting capital out, and I think that, I believe, is one of the things that they talked about, that special task force here in Washington, D.C. China has, $2 trillion of foreign currency that they want to go and invest overseas. The question is, will other countries overseas let them invest and buy assets?
So I'm an American company. You don't need my money. You want my expertise. The bar continues to go up. What does it take to succeed in 2010? Jake?
Well, I think it still goes back to commitment, but I think ultimately it also comes down to expertise. I mean, what is China? If you speak to government officials today, I mean, they're not really that interested in sort of manufacturers going to China to set up factories. They're not that interested in foreign companies just coming in to sort of sell in China. They really want people to be able to bring in some expertise, some domain knowledge, and technology. And I think that's, if you want to be successful, if you want to build successful partnerships in China, that's something you have to bring to the table. I mean, back in the day, it used to be that companies, I mentioned earlier about bringing your A game to China. A few years ago, companies would kind of take, their products, their old products, or the products that were sort of the low end of the market, and sort of bring them to China and try to sell to that market. Today, especially today's environment, companies are bringing their best products, their A products, and their A team, and putting it in China. So the market's super competitive. So I think if you want to go there to be successful, you've got to have that kind of focus.
Lip-Bu? Oh,
Harry? Maybe I add something to what Jack just said. From my own experience, that a lot of local governments are really becoming very involved, very active in recruiting and encouraging foreign technology companies to really set up their research centers, development centers. In the case of Microsoft, we have been approached by virtually every mid-sized city. Say, why don't you come here, set up a software center, and don't worry about the capital investment. The government will help you. We have tax credit and all those things. In the end, of course, Microsoft will choose some cities where we invest, mostly depending on whether we have supply of workforce and there's a talent, the university, and of course also the economic situation there. But getting back to your original question, that capital investment the most important thing for them? I think probably not.
Yeah, I think it's very exciting to see the change of the government attitude in China. And a few years ago, they are more focused on manufacturing. On the Cadence side, and I'm the CEO of Cadence, they see a tremendous need for design capability, the IP. And so, in terms of, they want to really promote more design capability and more engineer. So they are interested in the IP, the training, how can we get more, design, original design in China. And that's why it's really great opportunity for us to, we're building up the talent pool and then address the whole opportunity that the government opened up. And they're very ambitious. They want to be, create the 2030 MediaTek equivalent size company. And those are not easy to do. I said, are you guys sure? Are you guys committed? This is going to take a lot of money and energy. They said, absolutely. Just tell us how to do it. And are you guys coming in to help us to do that? And that's create opportunity for Microsoft, for us, for a lot of company. I mean, this is a welcome. And they provide the talent. They provide some of you know this Hegaoji program. And then this is a stimulus program. They have that 16 industry they want to build. And they are very determined and to build that. And they give grants, give that, so that they can promote that industry quickly. They are not talking about 10 years. Can we do it in 3 years? They are so impatient. And it's kind of the right attitude.
So they want to promote entrepreneurship. They want to promote pro-business creation,
design.
expansion.
That's right.
So you all have excellent experience. I'm sure there are lessons learned from being there, things you wish you did differently. Tell one story of what you wish you'd done differently. Harry, you came, 9 years ago, in 96 to China? Returned back to China to start research?
I actually went back to China in '98.
Okay.
And then came back 2 years ago. The thing I think we kind of underestimated it when we went there is actually how soon the local researchers can grow up to become a senior researcher level. Say typically in a research field, usually after your PhD, and it takes about 5-6 years to become fairly senior, really understand the fields. In the university system, that's when you get your tenure. Become a tenured associate professor. In Microsoft Research, that's when you become a senior researcher. So when we went to China, and we thought, well, if we just take the local Tsinghua PhDs, and in 5-6 years, hopefully in Microsoft environments, they can quickly grow up, just like a senior researcher here. We had some success there, but by and large, we underestimated the challenge there, how quickly they can really grow up. Which eventually we reevaluate the situation. We understand the importance of importing more foreign trained. They could be Chinese national or not, but foreign trained, particularly US trained senior researchers to move to China, and pretty much as a mid-level management, and continue to help train the local researchers. But long enough, then they can all grow up. But
And that was a good playbook to import Western expertise.
Right, US trained senior researchers to go back to China, help to jumpstart and help sustain the growth of the organization. I think it's something that we just did not expect that it actually can take very long.
Lip-Bu?
Well, if you look back 10 years, and I regret a couple of things. One, I should have moved to China. And two, I think I underestimate the gaming opportunity. I missed the Santa, and I thought that that's the end of it. And surprisingly, there's more coming, and so I underestimate that. And then secondly, this whole e-commerce, we missed the Alibaba, and I told Jack, somehow, because I'm not there and I depend on my team to do it, I wish I had more, go there more often instead of going there 2, 3 times, 4 times a year. And then now I try to make up the difference. So right now I'm going there every month, because every month you go back, there's so many change, and the progress is so rapid, and then you are behind, and you're missing the whole boat. And so I think it's very important that any company look at that market. You just cannot ignore, and then the only way you're going to do it is just jump in and do it. And if you have to depend 2-3 layers of people to do it, I think you miss the whole ball game.
So your regret was not investing more aggressively earlier in the growth of China.
Yes.
Linda?
I guess I'm the youngest one on this panel, so I don't think I'm old enough to have regrets yet. But I would share something, all kidding aside. I would say rather than regrets, I would say things that I have learned and observed while being in China, and compare that to my experience of working in Silicon Valley, in California, in New York. I think it's probably repeated in many things that people have said here, is that the key importance to being successful is to localize. Whether it's localize your staff, your pool of talents, localize your product, localize in terms of doing your business, because it is very different. It's a different culture. As much as the country is trying to open itself to the Western market, you're dealing with a very old culture. They have certain ways of doing business. Take, for example, face-to-face meeting is very important. I think when I was working in the US, an email here, a telephone there would happen sufficient for a lot of things that you could take care of. But in China, I have clients that requested that, oh, can you just come over so we could talk about scope of work, where that could probably have been done over the phone or even over a quick email. But that is the way that you do business over there. It's to build a relationship, to build the trust, because they do want to see who they're dealing with. So that's one big takeaway in terms of doing things differently. And in terms of getting back to the original point about localizing, training your staff is very important. I think you're looking at making a commitment of not just sending somebody over there as an expat for 2 years, because the first year would be dealing with getting used to the culture. The second year would be planning to leave. So I think they are missing the top tier, the experience level. So it does have to come from elsewhere, but if you do make that investment, it has to be a 5-year investment. That person has to make a decision of going there and living there, so that he or she could understand the business aspect of it, and while getting your staff ready so that they could do what they need to do. So again, I think the overall thing is to just make sure you are localized, you are committed.
Just one, if I may add one thing, and I make a horrible mistake. If I try to send people from Taiwan or Hong Kong to cover China, turned out that they never been in the inner circle. And finally, I decided 5 years ago, all localized and local, homegrown. And I think Harry, you can appreciate that. It's different. And even though you speak the same language, you're not in the inner circle and not plugged in. So it's a huge mistake I made.
So are there specific types of Western executives that could get into the inner circle?
Possible. I think everything's possible. But I think it's very important to able to get into the inner circle, plug in locally, and rather than same Taiwanese club or the Hong Kongese club or American club. Mm-hmm. And you really have to be the inner circle. And a very quick check for me is I checked with 2 of my advisors at the Liberal, your team is not being invited to the government policy discussion. That means that you are not in the inner circle.
Harry.
What was your question?
What would you do differently if you started right now?
Well, I think it's very different now, compared with 11 years ago. I would say mainly I think the Chinese economy has really grown so much now. When we started Microsoft Research 11 years ago in Beijing, it was very, very different. And if I just stay on this topic of the research community, when you think about that, the number of the top papers published in international conferences 11 years ago, it was very, very few coming from top Chinese universities. And nowadays, if you look at that, more and more from Tsinghua, from Peking University. I think now, if we start to run a research lab in Beijing, start a research lab in Beijing, I would advise that the most important thing is really immediately establish a very close relationship with top institute, local Chinese institutes like Tsinghua, like Chinese Academy of Sciences, and have very close partnership. Simply because it's going to be very, very difficult not to partner with them. So that would be my advice.
Jake, lessons learned?
Well, I echo something. I definitely agree with what Lip-Bu said. I might modify a little bit. I'd say that, in the early days when we went, we actually brought a lot of expats over as well. And there were expats from the U.S., from Taiwan, from Hong Kong, and I wouldn't say that I wouldn't say that they didn't get into the inner circle. I think the real critical difference is you got to find people who really love China. You got to find people who really want to be there. So I've found that as I've kind of gotten out and gone into government circles and sort of joined some of the inner circles there, I found that there actually are foreigners in there, but they're all people who really love China. And I would say there are a lot of Westerners here who probably love China and probably study China a lot more than some of the local people I know. So I think that's sort of one determinant. I'd say in terms of one of the things that I kind of learned or sort of being there. So growing up mostly here in the U.S., when you think about the government, you think of, well, you just pay taxes. So I never really thought of the government being able to help me at all in my business. But I found in China, if you really want to be successful, if you really want to get into the mainstream, you got to work with the government. And when you do, you get a lot of leverage. And that's something I regret I didn't do earlier. We've only started doing that in the last 2 years as we've started moving into sort of the inner cities in China. And I found that actually when I've worked with the government, wow, stuff gets done so much faster. There's so much more clarity, so much more certainty in the stuff that you're doing when you know that you've got the government working with you.
If I may add, just to classify my answer just now, actually, if you are Caucasian, actually you are more en route into the inside circle.
You're more
easy to get accepted. And what I mean is, Asian Chinese, they expect, from Taiwan and Hong Kong, it may be harder to get into inner circle. And I recently met a guy, Caucasian, but he speaks fluent Mandarin better than mine. And he spent 5 years there, and he's so effective. And I found that he welcome everywhere, in the government, because they're kind of fascinated with this Caucasian guy, can speak Mandarin so well and know all the local culture, all the local food. Boy, he's so effective. So I said, well, sometimes, it's very important. It depends on the individual and depend on how willing to be
So
part
still
of that
plenty of
system.
opportunities for Western expats to come across to China and assimilate and succeed. So we're out of time. We're going to open up for Q&A. We could keep going, but I think I'm sure there's a lot of questions out there.
The way I see it is that China, their growth, they're still doing infrastructure build in certain areas that they're pretty advanced, but there are sort of different layers or stages of their development. And for the U.S. companies in the past, we always think the U.S. market is first, and then the rest of the world. Now, if you look at games and say phone games and so on, China, because of population, they can actually have an entirely different market requirements and needs. So it seems to me that in the future, a company when they're developing some kind of product, it could be entirely two different things, because China by itself, its own culture, its own local requirements, it could be totally different from China. From the U.S. So what's your take on that?
Lip-Bu, why don't you take that?
Okay. So I think you are absolutely correct. Like, for example, in the mobile application side, they are much more advanced. I always admire my partners. In China, they have more fancy phone than I have. And so they have much more advanced in terms of payment, in terms of all the other gadgets they have. And so I think clearly they have and China government right now are defining, they know that the market is so big, they define their own standard now, and then you have to play the game, and then in order to meet that spec, to join them. And then the other thing is, if you just look at the population is so big, and just imagine the e-commerce, the online, social networking, and then that's so humongous, and they are trying all, just surprisingly, they have a lot of more things that we don't see it. I was surprised when my partner told me that we should invest in virtual trading. I said, who on earth want to do virtual trading? And it turned out to be a huge, humongous business in China. And then, so I think you just have to know and adopt. There's a new market, and they have a different purchasing patterns, and that you have to figure out a way to get involved with that.
Anybody else want to take this?
Maybe I just add a little bit more. From software development point of view, if you think about that, it is no such thing saying, from day one, you design the product just for the world. It just doesn't happen this way. You look at where your customer is. There's a very good reason why most interesting products start from the United States, simply because it is, as of today, for many, many more years, the United States is the biggest market. So you look at what the customer needs, and you develop products for those customers. As you design, to a certain point, and you start to think about that architecturally, can you really scale it out for the rest of the world and for other markets? I think as China, the economy gets better and better, and clearly that there are enough consumers there that warrants some products that we can start first in China. Then we scale out from China to the rest of the world. That certainly could happen. I think it's very, very easy for me to imagine that in not too distant future, that Microsoft could start some products initially from China, then scale to the rest.
I got one example, maybe a little bit sensitive for Harry, but I know Google, for example, they just they actually created
which company?
This is sort of surprising. Google actually launched a service in China that they don't have anywhere else in the world, which is a free music download service. So you could download all the music you want in China, and that only works in China. It doesn't work anywhere else for Google, and that's something I think, could be something. I think it's a good example of China's market being so unique and the users there being so unique that you have to build products in China for the China market.
Next question.
So I think you corrected several myths about China, but you added one myth yourself. You kind of convinced us all that in China there is no mid-level management, or there is a deficiency in mid-level management. And I've heard that a lot especially from managers here in the US, when you talk to them and say, oh no, I really don't have resources, just 15 junior people in China. And I visited China, I visited the Cadence R&D center in China, and I've seen those mid-level managers who are, with 5 to 10 years of experience. And of course, in the US standards, these are junior people, but actually they are very, very good managers. And I've seen a site manager who could qualify here in the US to be a mid-level manager, but actually this lady is in China, she's leading a site with about 100 people. So I think it's natural to have some age difference between one country and another. For example, a mid-level manager here in the US is typically 10 to 15 years younger than a similar job in Europe. So is it possible that you're just looking at those managers in China as a European manager would look at this young man who is leading this team here in the US?
Very interesting question. Who wants to take this?
I will.
Okay.
I don't think it's necessarily judging by age. I think it's really more by experience, because if it's judging by age, I think we would be talking about something else. I could speak from my own personal experience. I was sent to Shanghai 2 years ago to build a team which I focus in variation of all different companies for transaction basis. And my experience has been that you are correct. They're very competent people, highly educated, just have all the good qualities that you're looking for, but they just don't have years and years of doing variation, so that they need time to understand in certain circumstances, this is how you would deal with the solutions, or this is how you would handle the situation. So I don't, yes, I would say in our firm at least, if you go to China, in general, the average age is much, much younger than here. And it could be because of the country has just been commercialized for 20, 30 years the most. So that's going to have a reflection on the average age. But it may be in certain industries where you're going to find a lot more experienced people. But certainly, I think whether it's in high tech, in my line of business, which is service-oriented, you are seeing some deficiency in that particular point. But I think it's just a matter of time for them to catch up. I like to think that in 3 to 5 years, I'm not going to have that problem.
I'll also add to that. I think that in my company's experience, I mean, we find that we have very good middle management from a technology standpoint who could build and develop things. What I've found is that when it comes to business decisions, it's very difficult to find managers who actually have had the exposure. I don't think it's a capability issue. I mean, I think in our company, we actually started our own EMBA program internally because we just had to train the managers. And I found that if you give them the exposure that they need, they will develop those skills. So the innate skills are certainly there. Our problem is that once we train them up, about 15% of our managers end up going to our clients. They end up going to work for Microsoft. And so, there definitely is a talent shortage. Otherwise, my best people wouldn't be poached all the time. But generally, I'd say that, it's the capability is there. I think that what it comes down to is China only as a market only in the last few years have been opening up where it is getting exposure to the rest of the world. It's getting exposure to markets, in business issues, so that managers are starting to be able to have the exposure, the data points and experience that they need to be able to make better decisions.
Maybe I can clarify, just what we mean by this mid-level management shortage. I want to be clear that there's no such shortage thing for mid-level management for Chinese companies. They are doing fine with local Chinese. We are really talking about for multinationals and the foreign companies going to China and want to scale, and then they realize that there is such a thing in the middle that actually is a shortage problem. Part of the challenge there is that those people grown locally, they just never had a chance to understand the culture for those multinational companies. It will take time for those people to really learn what's really going on, how to deal with those people in Mountain View, for instance. It just takes time. I'm referring to the other company.
Next question.
Yes, this is about exits. It was mentioned about you need at least 5 years before you're looking for returns. But I mean, recently, in the last few years, we've seen large U.S., European, Singaporean companies investing in banks that have gone public, and I know BofA's exit on their investment in probably less than 2 years. Texas Pacific Group is looking to exit at a Shenzhen development bank. Is that something? I mean, this is relatively new, so it's not so much kind of startup VC, but it's large money investing in and larger money being taken out. Is that something which is going to go beyond the banking industry?
By the way, if you want to direct it to a specific panelist, please feel free.
Well, maybe with Lip-Bu, possibly. He's got experience on both sides.
Sure. So I think for the more established company like banks, they already public listed. They're doing more the pipe structure, and so the liquidity is much easier. For the startup environment, and you can go public in Hong Kong or local exchange or NASDAQ. And then the local exchange sometimes a little bit tricky. Right now it's a very long queue in the hundreds, so you have to take the number and wait in line. And so you just have to hopefully find a way to jump the queue, but it's not easy to jump the queue unless you can convince the government yours is special, but everybody is special. So you just have to wait in line. And clearly they have some requirement, how many years IPO, and then there are some kind of a NASDAQ equivalent that you can be more opportunistic without big profit, consistent profit. So I think there's quite a few opportunity, but I think the only thing is, for the foreigner, it's just, foreign capital is less opportunistic because, you may only go through Cayman structure, convert to renminbi. But for the local renminbi money, they have a lot of more flexibility. So they can go in and they can go listing in the local exchange. And so that's why a lot of venture firms have a renminbi fund, because they can really convert, and the entrepreneur can get the money quicker rather than have to wait for government approval or converting. It takes too long. They don't want to wait anymore. So I think back to your point, they don't need money anymore. They really need is a local renminbi. Now the US dollars, after you get approval, the money become very small. Is that, wow, I'm waiting for you for 9 months, and then your value is down 20%. And I must take the renminbi money, it's much quicker, and I can use the money more quickly. So I think exit is depend and local and exchange listing.
A question for the panelists. I know that we've been talking about opportunities in China, but reflecting on China's growth in your own experience, thinking about the opportunities that China going global presents to other economies or companies elsewhere. I know there's near-term issues with respect to unlocking the treasure chest and helping more money flow out, and I know there's issues with accepting that money from a sort of public perception point of view and political point of view, but looking beyond, say, 5 or 10 years with the growth that we expect in China, how do you see that translating into opportunities in our own economies?
Any particular panelists?
Let's start with Don for a second. Well, for my company, for example, I mean, we've been, we were started in the U.S. and then we went to China, and the bulk of our employees are there, and then actually now we've been going back out. So we've been, doing a lot of deals in Europe and actually, starting R&D centers in places like Finland and Sweden and actually, here in the U.S. again as well. So I think you're going to see more, Chinese companies that are going to go global or are going to want to go global if they have the opportunities. I think there actually are a lot of companies, Chinese companies right now that are very global too. I think, people, you probably people here have heard of Huawei, which is, a company that a few years ago Cisco probably didn't take too seriously, but today, they're attacking, they're really kind of expanding very quickly into places like, they started off in places like Africa and the Middle East, and actually now they're really taking a lot of market share from Cisco in Europe, and I'm sure eventually it's going to come this way. So I think that there are a lot of companies that want to go global. I think you're certainly, you're certainly hearing also from even traditional industries like banks, financial services. Those banks are also going global as well. They're going to different countries. So I definitely think it's going to be something you're going to see as a major trend over the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah. I want to leverage a little bit of the question about the middle level manager. And I talked with one of my clients, and he said he opened a company in Shanghai. They want to hire a local controller. When they interviewed a lot of people, they identified a good candidate, and then they paid a fair amount of money, but very hard to keep the person. It's kind of like a local opportunity so much, how to retain the best talent in your team.
So the question is how to retain local talent within China. Any particular panelists, or else perhaps Harry, you want to start?
I have a very simple view. It's really all economics and the talent. I think there are only 2 ways to keep those true talents. There is really one way, but they have different approaches. It's really overpaying. You have to overpay, if this is the talent. And as simple as that. There's a reason that, people vote by feet, so they go to different places. But the overpaying doesn't necessarily means just the money. And the overpaying could mean, career opportunity and other things as well. I think it's a great challenge for the management team. And in the case that, which is most of the cases, that you cannot really just simply throw more money. You have to really think about what are other things you can do for those individuals, such that their career continue to grow. I think it is a challenge that, and I think other people might have better experience than me. my approach is very simple: overpaying.
Jake?
Yeah, I think that I agree with Harry. I think it comes down.
Oh, thank you.
I think it comes down to you've got to really differentiate your workforce. So, of the people who are doing well, you've got to really reward the guys who are the real stars, and you've got to give them, maybe it could be monetary, but it's also, I think in China, a lot of it is giving them more exposure, more learning experiences, more career opportunities, giving them more responsibilities. But it really comes down to, really differentiating and making sure that you can take good care of your stars. And in our company, we do forced rankings in the company. So, we let go of the bottom 5% every 6 months, and we find ways to kind of give, massive bonuses to the top 20% in the company.
I think it's a real good question, and it's a very challenging one. And you mentioned about controller or financial officer. It's very demanding, in a huge demand for that, because a lot of companies want to go IPO. A couple of friends of mine, he was a controller in finance, actually in the auditing firm in US. When he moved to China, he became a CFO, and he was so highly demanded. I mean, there's so many offers, and so even you're overpaying it, you may not even keep him, because they can make 15 million in 2-3 years, and in some opportunities is real. And or even in some general manager or some really good leader, and they are so very hard to keep. When you become successful, help a multinational company to grow in China, that experience that he's successful, word of mouth, everybody know, and those guys, startup company chasing him, company ready to go IPO chasing him, he have offer. I mean, it's very easy to make 10, 20 million for them, and so for you to how to keep him and motivate him is really a challenge. And then I think sometimes you may not able to match. The only thing you can really work on is like challenging project, fulfillment, the people that he feel that this is the team that he feel like is a part of the family, and it's very hard for him emotionally to leave. And also, if you recruit a lot of people, you really work on him that, hey, these are the people, they all look up to you. How can you leave them? And that part, finally he said that, okay, that 20 million doesn't mean anything. This few guys more important, and then he stay.
So strategy 1, overpay. Strategy 2, guilt.
I would just say that, obviously not every company has the resource to overpay every single person that you hire, but it is a mix of both monetary. Obviously, you need to be competitive in your pay, but there's also that extra qualitative, the soft side that really would retain people. I think you will see a higher attrition rate in China because of all the different opportunities out there. But if you diversify, if you let this person be more exposed and have a more diversified experience or environment for them, certainly I think that speaks volume, because they do want to obtain the extra experience that they couldn't get elsewhere. And our firm, as part of the initiatives that we have, we try to promote and send staff to different offices, and they really enjoy that. And that's one of the repeating things that they have said as to why they stay with KPMG, because they wanted to get the international experience. They wanted to work with other colleagues in other parts of the globe. So some of the similar things like that will help you retain and attract talents.
Question?
I have a simple comment and a question as well. So I think this is a fun panel. I really appreciate, right? Because it seems all people laughing. The topic is really exciting. So the question is, I think today's topic, right? I think you guys shared a little bit about if you look at China opportunities, you have looked long-term perspective, right? 5 years, 6 years. Seems all of you agree. Well, today's topic actually says new rules, new opportunities, China to 2010. So what I try to see is that, do you guys see anything special? Because we're only 6 months, actually 5 months away to 2010, right? So are you guys trying to leave the last exciting topic and share with us what you see 2010?
Anybody want to take this question?
For me, it's very simple. It's all about the Bing. It's absolutely, it's a wild new world. It's called the internet, and the new rule, new opportunities is all being, I see that all seriousness.
So in 5 months.
You just ride the wave, catch on the right train, and you will be there. Yeah.
I would say for me, where I focus more on the transactional side and advisory side of business, I would say for 2010 and even for the rest of the months in 2009, we're really hoping and waiting to see the transaction volume picking up and also seeing how the stimulus program that the government has put in further plays out. Because a lot of the GDP growth that you're seeing right now in the first half of the year is all through the stimulus program, whether it's through bank loan or through fixed assets investments. So obviously you cannot keep on putting money in from the government forever. So we're really hoping to see that pickup from the economy itself, from the private sector. So that's something that I will be keeping track of in the next few months.
I have 3 suggestions for you. One, clearly the government going to have more design, so join Cadence, you can't go wrong with it. Secondly, it's a huge market, so the 中文的衣食住行, all the natural part of live, clothe, eat, you can't go wrong with that. So give you one example. The most profitable company we invest in China is the organic vegetable plantations. And Sequoia joined us on that investment. And then 2 IT specialist firms investing in the organic vegetable. Can you imagine net margin is in the 40%. And because the lifestyle change, people looking for higher quality, either it's convenient for buying clothes or food, and so you can't go wrong with that. And then thirdly, anything related to new media, either gaming, you can't go wrong with that. They're recession proof, and search. Everybody looking for search, so I think Bing seems like a good bet.
Thank you, thank you, Lipo.
Microsoft's a startup, right?
I would also add to just the different sectors that we have seen a lot of interest in, not only for consumer goods, because you are dealing with a huge population with increasing wealth. So I think anything relating to just whatever people spend money on, certainly we have seen a lot of investments in that. Shoes, retail stores, pig farms, for example, all those will probably benefit from the growth. But we also see a lot of interest in education, and it has been in the past, but it continues to be. We have also seen interest in pharmaceuticals. So again, it ties back to whatever the population, general public will need.
Questions?
So my question follows the previous one. So also talk about the short-term, how you balance short-term and long-term strategy. So you all talk about long-term commitment, right? If you want to get most out of China, you have to commit like 10 years, 20 years, right? But most executives of companies in Silicon Valley, so they're facing dilemma. Because if you look at your revenue out of China, maybe today, it's like, of your total business is 5%, maybe most, it's best is 10%, right? With today's economy, you have limited resource. How you put your resource? If put in the US, Europe, or you put 5% into China. So everybody agree like long-term China is a place to go, but how you balance your short-term goal and your long-term strategy. So is there any advice or thoughts? So that my interest. Thanks.
I would just say for us, for KPMG, our biggest resource or expenditure is payroll, people related. And even though the IPO market is down, that's a big driver for our business. We are still making investments in recruiting, and we are actually recruiting more than what our current business would hold. And the reason for that is that we do see the Chinese economy going to pick up faster than any other country. And when that does happen, it will happen fairly quickly. And when that happens, you're probably, if you haven't prepared, you will be left behind and you will find yourself short. So that's something that we are making the investment, and it does hurt. And then if you look at the numbers, it may not make sense. But I think again, whether it's short-term, long-term, intermediate, it is an investment that if you are committed to China, I think it's going to be a worthwhile investment that you will see great return.
Questions? Last question?
So I have a pretty sharp question. You guys all emphasized in order to be successful in China, it's important to work with the government. But the corruption is also an issue in China. So my question is, how do you guys, how do a company maintain a good, build a good relationship with the government and still maintain the integrity?
Do you direct to specific panelists?
Since he was born in China, so.
I think you are right. It is a very difficult question, and I really don't know how to answer this. And my responsibility was really running a research lab. When I was in China, most of people I deal with are the university professors, the Ministry of Education, Ministry of Science, Technology, and in my personal experience, I really have not got the opportunity to be exposed to the corruption problem you were describing, and I assume that there are always corruption problems in any kind of government. China as will continue to grow, probably corruption is still a serious issue. As a company, that we have to follow the local law, and as an American company, we have to follow the Chinese law and the U.S. law. And in general, we are just very, very careful about dealing with the business and activities, and follow the local laws.
I think there are still ways of building your relationship with governments, and I think certainly Chinese government is very keen on shedding that image of corruptions and anything negative relating to that. But nevertheless, things may still happen, but I think for all the panelists here, your corporate governance is going to dictate how you do your business, whether if it's a local practice, but I think that's just the part of business you don't get involved in.
So for public company, I think the Corruption Act is very serious, so you have to be careful. And my rule of thumb, doesn't matter whether it's a public company or not, basically don't start, and then if you start, you never end. So, and so people, the perception and the reputation will hurt you in the long run. So don't get the shortcut. If they have to take a little bit longer time, do it the right way. And then some of the government, you really no need to. And so you can do it in a very honest way, and then you have a lot to offer, and they respect that.
Well, we're out of time. Hope this has been great. This has been great for you guys all. Thank you for joining us. And thank you.
Harry, Lip-Bu, and Robin for sharing this discussion with us. And as a gesture of thanks, we have a Churchill Club T-shirt.
Oh.
It is made in El Salvador.
Thank you.
Please wear it in good health no matter where you travel. I'd like to once again thank our sponsors, Symbio and KPMG, Microsoft for having us here, and for all of you for coming. Thank you.
Thank you.